In this episode, we're going to focus on one of the most common ways privacy programs drift from good intentions into real risk: secondary use. Secondary use happens when personal data that was collected for one purpose starts getting used for another purpose, often because the data is convenient and the new use seems beneficial. Sometimes that secondary use is clearly inappropriate, like using support tickets to build marketing profiles, and sometimes it is more subtle, like using a customer's activity history for a new product feature that was never part of the original expectation. The reason secondary use matters is that it can break trust, violate purpose limitation, and create fairness problems even if the data never leaves the organization. What makes this topic difficult is that secondary use rarely announces itself as wrongdoing. It often looks like innovation, efficiency, or problem solving. The goal today is to learn how to control secondary use by verifying that guidelines are followed in daily operations, because policies alone do not prevent drift. Verification turns guidelines into reality by checking behavior where it actually occurs: in workflows, in systems, in access patterns, and in vendor relationships. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPM in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A practical definition to keep in mind is that secondary use is any use of personal data that is not part of the original, defined purpose for which the data was collected or not part of the purpose communicated to individuals at the time. This definition matters because people often think secondary use is only about selling data or sharing it externally, but internal reuse can be just as problematic. For example, an organization may collect address data for shipping, and then a team may decide to use that address data to infer income level for marketing segmentation. Even if the team never shares the data with anyone else, the use has shifted and the individual might not reasonably expect it. Another important aspect is that secondary use can happen when data is combined, because combining datasets can reveal new information that was not present in either dataset alone. Beginners sometimes assume that if the organization owns the data, it can use it however it wants, but privacy management is built on the idea that purpose and fairness constrain use. Secondary use is where those constraints are most often tested. Guidelines for controlling secondary use usually include purpose limitation, minimization, and required review for new uses, but guidelines do not matter unless they are applied consistently. The challenge is that daily operations are full of small decisions that never reach a formal review process. A product team adds a tracking field because it could be useful later. An analyst requests a broader dataset because it will make a report easier. A support manager asks for access to new dashboards because they want more visibility. A vendor offers a new feature that uses customer data for improvement by default. Each of these decisions can create secondary use risk, and none of them looks like an obvious privacy violation in the moment. That is why verification is essential. Verification is the set of practices that confirm that what the organization claims it does, like limiting use to defined purposes, is what it actually does when people are busy and incentives push toward broader use. Verification is where privacy management becomes operational rather than aspirational. A strong way to control secondary use is to make the original purposes and allowable uses visible and understandable to the people doing the work. If purpose definitions live only in legal documents that teams never read, teams will naturally invent their own interpretations. Privacy management can support visibility by ensuring systems and datasets have documented purposes that are accessible to owners and users. This also ties into data classification and stewardship. A dataset with a clear owner, a clear purpose, and clear usage guidelines is harder to misuse accidentally because people can check the boundary. A dataset with unclear ownership and vague purpose is a perfect candidate for secondary use drift because anyone can justify almost anything. Visibility alone does not stop misuse, but it reduces the chance that misuse is accidental. It also creates a baseline for verification because you cannot verify adherence to guidelines if the guidelines are not known. So controlling secondary use begins with making the boundaries real and discoverable. Verification then needs to happen where secondary use typically begins, which is in access and data extraction. If a team can export large datasets easily, they can reuse data easily. If access is tightly scoped and exports are controlled, secondary use becomes harder and more visible. This is why least privilege and logging are not only security controls, but also purpose controls. By limiting who can access a dataset and by logging access, you create accountability. Verification can include periodic review of who has access to sensitive datasets and whether they still need it for the documented purpose. It can include review of high-risk actions like bulk exports, especially when exports are frequent or occur outside normal patterns. It can include monitoring for unusual query behavior that suggests exploratory analysis beyond the approved scope. The goal is not to monitor people for its own sake, but to ensure that access patterns align with allowed purposes. When access patterns diverge, that is a signal to investigate, clarify, or adjust controls. Another place secondary use appears is in product and analytics changes, because new features often want more data. Verification in this area means ensuring that changes that expand data collection or change data use trigger review. A mature organization has a change process that flags when new tracking, new profiling, or new data sharing is being introduced. But even with a process, verification is needed because teams sometimes treat changes as minor and skip review, especially when deadlines are tight. Privacy management can verify by sampling product changes, reviewing data schemas for expansion, and checking whether new data fields were introduced with documented purpose and retention decisions. Verification can also involve reviewing analytics pipelines to ensure they are using approved datasets and that derived datasets are governed by the same purpose boundaries. This is important because analytics work is a common pathway for secondary use drift, since analysts often combine data to find insights. Insight generation is valuable, but it must still respect purpose and fairness. Verification ensures insights are generated within boundaries rather than at the cost of trust. Secondary use also happens through vendor features and platform settings, because many services offer optional capabilities that use data in broader ways. For example, a platform might enable model training, benchmarking, or product improvement based on customer data unless a setting is turned off. Secondary use can also occur when a vendor changes its terms or adds subprocessors that expand how data is processed. Verification here means periodic review of vendor configurations, terms, and subprocessor notices, not just a one-time due diligence at onboarding. It also means ensuring contracts include purpose limitation clauses and that those clauses are reflected in operational settings and vendor behavior. A common failure mode is assuming the contract handles it, while the platform settings still allow broader use. Another failure mode is assuming a vendor's privacy statement is stable while the service evolves. Privacy management controls secondary use by treating vendor management as ongoing, with verification that the service is still aligned to the agreed purpose and that any new uses have been reviewed and approved. It is also important to verify secondary use controls in human workflows, because not all data use is automated. Customer support can be a source of secondary use when agents capture extra information in free text notes. Then those notes are reused for analytics or training. Sales teams might store personal notes in customer relationship systems. Then those notes become part of broader analysis. Human resources workflows might include sensitive details that later become accessible to broader audiences through reporting. Verification here involves reviewing forms, templates, and training, and it also involves examining how free text fields are used and whether they capture more than necessary. Privacy management can also work with operations to create safer alternatives, such as structured fields with limited options, which reduces the chance of collecting unnecessary sensitive detail. This is a good example of a privacy principle becoming an operational control. Reducing free text reduces accidental overcollection and reduces the ability to reuse sensitive content in unintended ways. Verification ensures that the safer approach is actually adopted. A beginner-friendly way to understand verification is to think of it as proving alignment between three things: the documented guideline, the technical behavior, and the human behavior. The documented guideline says what the organization intends, such as using a dataset only for service delivery. The technical behavior shows what systems allow, such as whether exports and broad access are possible. The human behavior shows what people actually do, such as whether teams are combining datasets for new analyses without review. Verification compares these and looks for mismatches. When mismatches appear, the response is not automatically punishment. It might be clarification, training, redesign, or stronger controls. The point is to correct drift before it becomes a breach or a trust failure. This is why verification is a continuous practice, not a one-time audit. Secondary use drift is gradual, so the best control is a routine process that catches drift early. Controls for secondary use must also handle exceptions thoughtfully, because not every new use is inappropriate. Organizations may legitimately expand purposes, especially when they introduce new products or when they find ways to improve security and fraud prevention. The key is that expansions should be deliberate, transparent, and governed. Verification helps ensure that when a new purpose is introduced, the organization updates its documentation, assesses the impact, and implements safeguards like minimization and access restriction. It also helps ensure that new purposes do not quietly become default for all data without clear justification. A common failure mode is purpose creep, where a new purpose is approved for a narrow use case, and then teams treat that approval as permission for broad reuse everywhere. Verification can prevent this by checking whether the new purpose is being applied only where intended and by ensuring that datasets are not being repurposed broadly without additional review. This keeps innovation aligned with accountability rather than turning innovation into uncontrolled expansion. As we close, controlling secondary use is not mainly about writing stricter rules. It is about ensuring the rules are followed in the messy reality of daily operations. Secondary use risk grows when purposes are vague, ownership is unclear, access is broad, and data is easy to export and combine. Verification reduces that risk by making purposes visible, by reviewing access and exports, by ensuring product and analytics changes trigger review, by monitoring vendor settings and changes, and by examining human workflows where free text capture and informal sharing can create unintended reuse. The verification mindset compares documented guidelines to actual technical and human behavior and treats mismatches as signals to correct drift through clearer guidance, better design, or stronger controls. When privacy management builds this habit of verification, it turns purpose limitation from a statement into a living control that protects individuals even when teams are busy and incentives push toward broader use. That is how privacy programs stay trustworthy over time, because trust is maintained by consistent behavior, not by good intentions.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.